Thank you. We're ready to start again for a short discussion about the sustainable SMEs and export. And back on stage we have Kjeldsen, who is a director here at the Confederation of Danish Industry, who's hosting us today. He's the director of the manufacturing industry in Denmark. And also we have the CEO of the Industries Fund?
Yeah, we call ourselves the Danish Industry Foundation.
The Danish Industry Foundation. The CEO, Thomas Hofman-Bang. And I know the foundation is a private foundation that supports a number of projects and initiatives that all have to do with competitiveness, innovation, attracting investors, etc., etc. First of all, let's start out with looking at the competitive situation for Danish SMEs. How are they doing? Are they growing? Are they innovating? Are they creating jobs and new solutions? Or is it more driven by the larger sector? Either of you?
Thomas, you go ahead. I could give it a shot. From our perspective, I guess in broad terms, the Danish SMEs are doing okay. They have obviously been impacted by the pandemic. But is also returning to more stable waters now, and they're extremely important for the Danish economy, because they are basically the backbone of the Danish business community, are SMEs by nature, and we follow them closely with many initiatives, all to enhance their competitiveness. So therefore, overall they're doing okay, but they can definitely do better, which is what we focus on, to try and help them step change and exploit the huge potential many of them have that they don't exploit well enough. So they are lacking on digitalization, they're lacking on innovation. Many of them could probably export more than they do. And then, as will be the theme of today, the whole transition to a more sustainable way of operating is also a challenge for them. And it's a big threat if they don't address it in due times, which we'll come back to in the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree, Jacob?
Yeah, I do. I think, of course, SMEs in different sectors have been hit on different levels of the COVID-19 crisis. If you look at the manufacturing industry in Denmark, I think we have managed to get through fairly well. I think that a lot of SMEs, but also larger Danish companies, have been very good at exploiting the opportunities, but also, just getting more acquainted with Microsoft Teams and what Microsoft Teams can do. I think I've seen a lot of, or Zoom, yes, have seen a lot of development there. So I think they've come through that quite nicely, if you can say that. But of course, export is a great challenge if you cannot travel. And I think that is going to be the main sort of focus for the next couple of months. But after that, of course, you still have the sustainability agenda in front of the SMEs of Denmark. And I think we have a good foundation for working on those agendas, but there still needs to be more focus.
Thomas, you mentioned internationalization as one of the things that they could work more on. It seems like going abroad, it doesn't necessarily setting up a shop, but simply exporting more. It seems like an obvious way to expand your market and to increase revenue. What are the obstacles? Perception?
Courage, perception, knowledge. It can be many different factors. And if we look at where the export goes, it goes to Sweden and it goes to Germany. So, and even, if you look at where in Germany does the export go to, it's northern Germany. So there's definitely a huge challenge, opportunity, trying to upskill them how to actually go abroad and offer their services and products. And it's a long journey where they need basically individually to be coached how to do that. You can try and work with delegations and broader initiatives, but a number of the projects we have where we try and address this, you get down to a very basic level where they basically need to be taken by the hand.
I know that DI, actually, the Confederation of Danish Industries, offers internationalization advice for your members, right?
Yeah, it's an important part. I mean, internationalization is a lot of things. It's just not one thing, and it's very different from company to company. So yes, that's one of the services for our members here. But a new service, which is actually what is very interesting, and we're working with the Industry Foundation about, is the fact that a lot of Danish companies, especially the SMEs, are facing requirements from their customers, the large customers, meaning both Danish companies but international customers, who are asking them, what are you doing on the CO2 agenda? How are you participating in making the green transition? And as a lot of the large companies around the world are signing up to the sustainable businesses, practices, and science-based targets in particular, we can see that these requirements are sort of cascading down on the Danish SMEs. So that's why we, together with the Industry Foundation, have put a lot of focus right now on how can we help the SMEs also get a baseline, so to speak, on their CO2 emission, because we believe very strongly that this is going to be a competitive parameter going forward.
Yeah, I would say it's a game changer approaching us here. Yeah. Where if the Danish SMEs don't wake up in due time, they will simply be disselected in the marketplace. It's going to be a huge demand driver whether you're able to respond to the sustainability questions being asked by your customer, which then dribbles down all the way through the value chain. And if you look at what the big companies in Europe are doing now, they're really moving the needle in terms of demands on this agenda. And they are all moving to scope 3 now under the science-based target regime, meaning that they start to ask those questions to their sub-suppliers, and it goes all the way down and will face many Danish companies, because we typically are sub-suppliers as part, somewhere in the value chain with the demographics we have in Denmark, and therefore, if they are not able to respond, somebody else will get that order. So therefore, they need to step up, and that's what we're trying to address with this project, together with Jacob and his members, to try and step change and get some good use cases that can hopefully act as inspiration for many more companies to start acting.
After lunch, there's a panel on innovating your way to sustainable tomorrow. And here, I know that several of the speakers will talk about how do we measure. It's easy to say we're sustainable in some ways, or we're working with SDG, or I picked three goals, but to actually prove that there is an impact at the end of the day. Are you also looking into that? You both talked about evidence a little bit.
It starts with, of course, also with evidence. And in this project in particular, the first basic topic is simply just to measure your CO2 impact. Many of these companies don't measure. So just to teach them how to measure is step number 1. And step number 2 is then, how do we put an action plan in place to actually change the situation where the baseline is today? Just those 2 simple focus areas is where you need to start. And what we focus on in this project. And then we're looking in the Danish Industry Foundation how we take that to the next level in terms of sustainable production in broad terms, which is much more than CO2. It's waste, it's use of resources, the use of energy, etc. How do we work with circular economy, etc. That's going to be the next step that they need to respond to.
Last year, for the opening of this of the Green Impact Week, we had Velux up here, and they told us about how they were not just looking at the future impact, but they're actually taking a historic look back and saying the full lifetime impact of their activities needs to be neutralized at least, and then made into a positive impact. But it's rare to see those really far-reaching initiatives by organizations, and you have to have a certain size to take on such a task.
And that's indeed why we need to work deliberately with the SMEs, because the big companies like Velux, they know how to do it, and they have the resources to actually do it. But the SMEs are kind of left in between there. So they need both inspiration, help, finance, and other types of resources to actually be able to start that transition.
A lot of Danish wealth has been, of course, of the yeast process, as you know, but also the creative industries have been important for Danish wealth when it comes to fashion companies like Bestseller, easy companies. We also have Lego. We have lots of design companies that have not only created jobs and exports, but also branded Denmark in many ways. But we here at Creative Business Network, we have since 2014, we had the Creative Business Investors. So these are investors investing in the creative industries, usually from abroad. Isn't also the internationalization is also a matter of financing. You need somehow to get, it's not something you just do, even if it's Swedes or Northern Germans. You need to find the right funding for your exports or for your innovation initiatives. Is that the whole investor access to finance for the SMEs in Denmark, has that been improved? We often say that the investors from abroad, they fly over Copenhagen to Stockholm and Helsinki. Maybe it's a myth, or is it so? Has it been improved?
I think my impression is that the reputation of Danish companies, both small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as the big ones, is fairly well. It's very good. I think that a lot of investors are looking to Denmark, especially when we're talking about sustainability. I think in terms of financing for the SMEs, I think it's a matter of the chicken and the egg right now, because of course investors are increasingly focusing on investing in sustainable companies, which I think is a great thing, and that is what is going to really move the agenda. But of course, if you are an SME, you are speculating, how do I actually live up to these things? And the question that we get very often is, okay, so how do I get started? Or how do I report on my progress? So that's where we are trying to step in and see how can we help companies get started and we have used science-based target as the bearing point. And from there on...
Can you explain just briefly the science-based targets?
Yeah.
What do they look like? How do they sound?
Well, the science-based target is I think, if without going into a very, very long and technical discussion, is the closest thing we come to the standards right now of CO2 emission and how to reduce your CO2 emission. So the science-based target is basically an initiative under the umbrella of the United Nations. And it's widely recognized. And a lot of companies are now signing up to be certified, and thereby saying that our emission going forward will help the global temperature rise be below 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. So that is the closest thing. But of course, it requires work to comply with these, to apply for the process of being certified. And this is where we can step in and see, can we do something for the small and medium-sized enterprises? Because by helping them, we also help our larger members who are depending on these companies as their sub-suppliers.
And that framework is being broadly used, meaning that that's also the framework that, you know, all the companies in the value chain subscribe to. And with this scope 1, 2, and 3, many companies have been working with 1 and 2, which is what happens inside your own factories, what happens when you tap into use electricity, what kind of footprint does that leave you with? But they're now moving to scope 3, meaning the sub-supplier side, which is in many cases where 70% of your CO2 emission typically comes from your sub-supplier dimension. So you've only been working with the 30%, and that's why it's very important to move to that. And that's where the knock-on effect comes for Danish SMEs, because they now becomes part of that agenda due to that dribbling down through the value chain effect.
Yeah. I mentioned before that we had the Danish startup pitching finals at the top of Copenhagen on Thursday. The day before, the Swedes had their competition, and then before that it was Russia, but the Swedes chose a startup called Footprint Level. So this is a startup from Sweden that will come to Copenhagen and compete end of June. They are working on the whole visualization and explanation of these targets. How do you actually explain it to the general public? So they are helping companies to disseminate the results and what they are doing in this field. We have time for just one more question here. Based on existing knowledge, where do we find the largest threats and opportunities for the SMEs? What do you know, from what you know already, where do we see the biggest threats for Danish or foreign SMEs for that matter? And what are some of the opportunities that they should latch on to?
You want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure. What we can see right now is that a lot of SMEs are getting these emails or contacts from their large customers, which is basically, we are aiming to become climate neutral or zero carbon emission by 2025 or 2030. You are a sub-supplier, you are scope 3, you need to be on this journey as well. And then very often the companies, if they don't have a clue of what that means, they will be in trouble. That's the baseline, and this is where we need. So that is the biggest threat. The great thing is that it's both a threat, but if you manage to get started, and what is important is that the large companies are not saying, we need your full CO2 reducing plan right now. They say, we want to see you be in the progress. We want to see you do something about it. Then it's actually a great opportunity. Because for Danish companies, I believe, again, that this will be not only a Danish, but an international competitive parameter. So if you're good at this, and if you're good at talking about and explaining what you're doing, actually you can capture new customers. So I think it's an interesting thing that you both have a threat, but also a huge opportunity.
So in a way you can say that the large corporates that buy, they drive innovation among the SMEs.
I think so.
They force them somehow.
I think so, yeah.
Definitely. And then, you asked broadly about challenges and opportunities. A broad challenge is also a lack of digitalization, lack of innovation capabilities across SMEs. And that has something to do actually also with the first topic we just talked about, because it kind of goes hand in hand. And innovation is the key to finding solutions in this area as well. And if you can't find, if you're not able to drive that innovation in-house, you need to somehow cooperate with other parties that can help you. And that's where the whole startup scene, scale-up scene comes into play, where most likely we will see a lot of innovation, a lot of new solutions coming from the startup scene, which is also why we're also trying to foster and nurture that part of the value chain. We have a program called Green Up Accelerator, where we are trying to promote this and help by accelerating the companies with good ideas there. And we have a third project where we actually indeed try and make the SMEs work together with startups, which they typically have no tradition for doing. So also trying to open that door.
So simply getting the SMEs established, small and medium-sized enterprises that have existed for a while and cannot longer be considered a startup, work with the startups. Or we will also have a panel later on where we will have some really dear from the unemployment fund for the academics, talking about how if the SMEs would just employ different kind of talents, they would also be better off in this process.
Definitely, that we have been, there has been campaigns from time to time, employ your first academic employee, and they can definitely do a lot, and there's clear evidence that once SME starts to employ employees with an academic background, it has a huge impact, and is the first step to actually start driving innovation and digitalization and all the other issues they have.
Exactly. And I know that Jakob is too modest to say that, but again, also DI has some really great manuals for the members on digitization, the whole strategic implementation, etc. I think we should probably round off here, because I know for the next panel we have a hard back end here. So thanks a lot to Jakob Kjeldsen and also to Thomas Hofman-Bang from the Danish Industry Foundation, and especially thank you for supporting the SMEs and to be there for this important sector and for looking out for a green impact. So thank you very much.